Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for watching another video. In today's video, we're going to talk about how many gun magazines should I carry. This is a question that I posed on a post and another video, and I have a lot of positive feedback. Based on the feedback, on the research, and my interviews with people who have actually been involved in shootings, I have made this video just for you guys, and at the end, I have my own recommendations on gun magazines, how many is recommended. Generally, you should carry. Obviously, it's going to be mission dependent. Please like this video, guys. I have this biggest feeling that YouTube is already going to ban me or demonetize this video, and it's very frustrating. This video, I spent a matter of days on it. It runs about 46 minutes. If you have to come back and forth to watch different parts of the video, please do so. Thank you so much for your patience as well. You might hear me keep repeating over and over, but I just want to make it clear that the situation or the environment where you work is going to have a huge difference on how many magazines you should carry. And also another thing is this: your magazine, the number of magazines that you decide to carry are going to depend on your state's restriction on higher capacity magazines. Now, when I mean higher capacity magazines, I mean any magazine that's able to hold more than 10 rounds. That's going to vary. And the important thing in the study is also, you're going to hear me talk about round counts, how many rounds were fired in a certain incident. That is important because if we know how many rounds were fired in most of these incidents, or majority of incidents, we're going to know how many magazines we should carry based on the round count. So if we find out that most incidents, 15 rounds were fired during these shootings, well, if you are in California, okay, that equals 2 magazines. If you are in a state that allows you the right to adequate self-defense, well, 1 magazine might deal with the lethal force encounter, the issue. So remember, magazine count will depend on how many rounds were fired in this research that I'm going to present to you in a minute. Right before we're about to launch off, I also want to explain something here. There are no studies of armed private security officers being involved in shootings. There's no data that's collected from that. So because of that, we have to depend on police officer involved shootings. And remember, the circumstances are very similar. As an armed private security professional, you might be the one who has to handle an armed robbery that's occurring on your property. Law enforcement will respond because they're called to the scene, but you might be in totally similar situations. That way you can trust these. That's one of the reasons you can trust these studies. As a security officer, this is the best body of knowledge that I could present to you. I wish that there was a study that just involved private security, but there isn't. It's only law enforcement. But please, let's learn from all the lessons that I'm going to present to you in a minute. Let's learn from the facts that I'm going to present. The data that I relied upon isn't just data where I just talk to somebody and they just spit out some information and then I produce a video. This is actual hard data, and it was conducted by a researcher who knows how to do research. The name of the research project is called Officer Involved Shootings: What We Didn't Know Has Hurt Us. And this is written by Aveni. Thomas Aveni. He has a Master of Science degree. What I like about Mr. Aveni is he's a 20-plus year veteran of being a firearm instructor, a 20-year firearms instructor veteran. What we like about Mr. Aveni is he has experience being a firearm instructor. When you're a firearm instructor, you tend to go through a lot of trainings. You tend to do debriefings with officers who have actually been involved in shootings. And you're training. Sometimes you might have to testify to your department's standards and training. Who's going to testify? Well, it's probably Mr. Aveni. So let's talk about the research here. So what he did is he studied agencies, law enforcement agencies, that were easy to calculate a hit probability or a round fired count. Not every agency is going to report the same information as other agencies. And I'm going to tell you in a minute what agencies were studied in this project of his. We have NYPD, New York Police Department, between 1990 and the year 2000. We have the Portland Police Bureau, also known as Portland Police or Portland PD, 1984 through 1992. We have Metro-Dade Police, that's your Miami Police Department, between 1988 and 1994. We have the Baltimore County Police, 1989 to the year 2002. You have Los Angeles County, and that's between 1998 and 2002. You might be thinking, well, Sean, we're nowhere close to any of these years. Why are you producing old data? You guys, the data is consistent through all of the years. Even right now, if you were to do the same research project, you might find that the hit probability is maybe a little bit better from improved standards and training, but probably not much more. And again, it just depends on the agency. We can also rely on data that was before the time period here, and that data still holds true. The information is still valuable for our current year. So this is what he found. Aveni found that during his study that the NYPD had a hit probability of only 15%. And this is a gunfight hit probability. See, the problem with part of the study is this. Not every officer involved shooting involves a gunfight. So typically at NYPD, the way a gunfight is classified is somebody presents a firearm to you. Well, every officer involved shooting may not involve a gunfight. Somebody might present a knife to you. Somebody might try to run you over. Somebody might try to take your gun. But here, NYPD, during these years, it was very limited on the reporting. And all we do know is that this study involves gunfights, and the hit probability is 15%. That's not good. That's not good, you guys. And we found that 5.2 rounds were fired per officer. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to give it actually 6 rounds because you can't fire 5.2 rounds. So whenever there's a 0.2, 0.3, we're always going to round up. So you round this, even if it's a 0.1 or 0.2, you're gonna round up. So here, hit probability 15% with 6 rounds. The lowest capacity magazines that we've seen that are duty are about 10 rounds. At NYPD, 6 rounds would be sufficient considering there's only one assailant. And we all know that in these critical incidents, there may not only be one incident. Let's discuss a little bit further. You might need 2 magazines as well. You have a second assailant. Well, 6 rounds per 10, or 6 rounds per 1 magazine. Those 6 rounds will suffice. What if you need another 6 or 7 for another assailant? You're gonna run out. So for that reason, 2 magazines. Especially, okay, if you roll to a scene like this, and by the way, I want you to look at this guy's patches. Okay, the guy on the upper right. And I just noticed that at this second. He's wearing patches. And it almost looks like it's a private security officer patch. So you might be thinking, well, hey, this is one of my partners. Or maybe somebody that's involved in private security. And you might hesitate that second longer because you're trying to figure out what's going on. Here, would you feel confident knowing that NYPD hit probability between those years were 15% only, and that 5.2 rounds, well, 6 rounds were fired per officer? Would you feel confident with 1 magazine? I think 2 would be the solution here during this year here. Talk about Baltimore County, 1989 through the year 2002. The hit probability during these years was 54%. Okay, that's not too shabby considering NYPD's was 15%. This county did not report how many rounds were fired per officer, and that's a problem with the studies, you guys. That's my criticism, is that not every study is consistent with the others. Can we rely on these studies? Well, I think partially, but just hear me out towards the end. So in LA County, the problem with LA County is that during the study, they did not report how many misses were made. They only reported hits. So the hit probability for one officer is 51%. Let me ask you this. Think about this. If you have another officer that arrives on scene, do you think the hit probability would go up or down? Let's see. So you got two officers. Now it's a 23% hit probability. It's almost like, hey, partner, don't show up because my hit probability in LA County is going to be 51%. Just stay over there. Well, how about three officers? What do you think? Well, more than two officers is 9% per each individual officer. So LA County, when it says LA County, that's the whole entire county. That's the LA County Sheriff's Department. That's the small other agencies there. It does not include the Los Angeles Police Department. Just LA County Sheriff's Department and all the smaller agencies. And what we found here is that in a bunch shooting, the probability of hitting the assailant decreases. And a bunch shooting is when you get a bunch of officers. Well, technically it's more than one. You get two officers, you're going to have more misses. So just think about this. When you're at your assignment, whatever it is, according to this study, you're going to be more accurate because you're probably depending on your hits to hit this person that you need to. When you have two or three officers, you might be relying on the other officer for accuracy. Maybe there's some more dynamics. You don't want to hit the other officer that's on the opposite side of you. That could also play into account. Or you might believe that the other officer is shooting the suspect, actually hitting him and actually making impacts. So that's also a probability. And this study did not tell us how many rounds were fired per officer, unfortunately. So because of that, we really don't know how many magazines we should carry. We don't know how many rounds of ammunition we should carry based on the LA study. But again, what we do know is when you have one officer, 51%. Two officers, which now you're starting to talk about a bunch shooting, that's 23%, and then more than two is 9%. Just think about the guy here with it looks like body armor. Okay, he's wearing the sheriff patch to distract you. You have to look at the overall body language of this person that might be entering the bank. Is this person really a sheriff's deputy or not? Look to see if this person has a badge, a patch, and really what you have to see is is this person wearing a uniform or equipment that's consistent with law enforcement standards. When there's any type of deviation from the norm, you have to pay closer attention to what is going on. Now, let me ask you this. Would you feel comfortable walking into this situation here with one magazine? Would you feel comfortable walking into the situation with 6 rounds? Okay, just consider the appearance of this slide here, the photograph, and consider the hit probabilities. I mean, that's a 1 out of 2 chance almost of actually making impact. Portland Police Bureau, 1984 through 1992. The hit probability was 43%. That's 4.6 rounds fired per officer. Almost like NYPD. It actually looks like they probably practice a little bit more. So that'd be 1, 2, 3 rounds in the magazine, 4, 5 rounds. Again, you're not going to have a 0.6 of a round, so we round up. 1 magazine, 6 rounds. Miami-Dade. Miami. 1988 through 1994. Let's talk about this. Hit probability, 30%. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Could it be a lack of effective training? Maybe. Could it be the political atmosphere at that time? Maybe. Okay. So many factors. There was a mean of 3.2 rounds, and the Miami-Dade study covered actually revolvers, and they covered semi-autos. I like to focus my attention actually on semi-autos because that's the norm right now in law enforcement. With revolvers, you're going to get about 6 rounds. If you study revolver gunfights and you start seeing 6 rounds that were fired per officer, there is probably a reload right after that, and maybe this situation has stopped being a lethal force encounter. Maybe somebody gave up. Another horrible thing about the statistics is you don't know if the officers were killed. All you know is many times what the hit probability is, and about half the time how many rounds were fired. So that'd be 1 round, 2, 3, 4. Again, we round up. Well, oh no, 3 plus 1, we round up. Okay. Well, what's my criticism here? Well, you guys, Miami-Dade, you're going to have a lot of officers showing up to a lot of these calls. Okay, so you might have what's called bunch shootings. Remember, that means there's more than one. Bunch of other officers are firing. You might be thinking, well, that other officer is making impact. Okay, maybe I need to hold off on the rounds that I'm firing. So you probably get a lower round count. Of course, these 4 rounds would definitely fit into most magazines. In Miami-Dade, it looks like as long as there's a lot of other officers and there's the gunfight or lethal force encounter, you're good with 1 magazine. But hey, not every time, every second, an officer's going to just appear there as your backup. So this is the NYPD use of force analyst page here, and this is where I got a lot of the statistics that I relied on. I got it from this web page here. And my criticism here is that NYPD after the study that was created, it looks like they stopped calling something a hit ratio and they call it something different, and I'll tell you what that is. And that's just for political purposes. You don't want to call something a hit ratio. It gets people agitated, it gets them annoyed. It almost seems like the police are trying to get better scores on you if you're the bad guy. Now, I'm just thinking on the total opposite side, but what I will tell you is it's no longer called hit ratios or hit scores. No, it was never hit scores, hit ratio or hit percentage. Just so that you have confidence in this video and you don't think the information given you is outdated, I actually included a current study for NYPD. This is a 2019 study. Remember at the beginning of the video, I said, well, you can go back. I mean, you can even go back years, decades before, and the statistics for hit probability, they're always going to be close to each other. You're always going to get less than that 50%. You might get 35%. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on the agency. And as the years progress, I would believe that accuracy is getting a little bit better, but there's not much of a difference. And what I did is I pulled this NYPD 2019 stats. So as you could see, so an ID, it says here rounds fired per ID. An ID is an intentional firearm discharge or intentional discharge, and an AC is an adversarial conflict. So now what NYPD was doing is they're actually telling you that this is an aggregate of the data of firearm discharges and conflicts. These are your officer-involved shooting. These are not just gunfights. Remember, there was a time when NYPD classified a gunfight as a different type of officer-involved shooting than officer-involved shooting, where somebody tried to run you over and then you shot at them or you shot them. Now they're combining everything in the more current years. So per officer, we have a 22% of the time, and all of these years, the next couple of years that I'm going to be discussing right now, you're talking about between 50 and 70 officer-involved shootings for NYPD for the year. So in 2019, we had 22% of those shootings involved 6 to 10 rounds. Okay, 6 to 10 rounds. We have 13% were 11 to 20 rounds. Okay, that's one round over the standard capacity magazine for those of you who live in California. Now, aside from new legislation that might occur, in California, you can't have more than 10 rounds unless there's some type of exemption. So here, with 11 to 20 rounds in these lethal force encounters, you would need to do a magazine. You probably need to do a magazine change. One round was 11 of those incidents were one round, which is 20%, and then majority of the incidents were between 2 and 5 rounds, and that was 45% of the time. 2018, okay, look at the numbers. If you have to pause this video, do so. But look at between 2 and 5 rounds, were 50% of the encounters. Okay, and then the next number up was 1 round, was 8. Okay, there's 8 times, and that was 31%. You guys, about the 1 round, sometimes when there's one, not all the time, but sometimes when there's 1 round fired, defense attorneys talk to their client about they have a discussion about a negligent or accidental discharge, because it's that 1 round maybe just went off. So at the second round, when you fire a gun in an officer-involved shooting, that second round is more intentional than if it was the first. Now, this is not every single circumstance. This is how the attorneys start to think. And then between 6 to 10 rounds, 11% of the time were fired for 2018. Let's talk about 2017. So again, we have 1 round that was fired per officer, 34% of the time. That takes out most of the pie here. 2 to 5 rounds were fired 28% of the time. Okay, that's 28%. Again, about the 1 rounds, defense attorneys tend to question whether the first round was an accidental discharge, whether it was intentional or not. But once you get to the 2 to 5 rounds, you have something that is more of an intentional shooting. Maybe with the 1 round, the officer finger was on the trigger instead of it being on the trigger guard or slightly above the trigger guard. That's where you might get these accidental discharge. And remember, these statistics include an incident where maybe there's like some standoff, a domestic violence situation, where the weapon involved, the suspect may have put the weapon down and the officer may have accidentally fired a round. They'll include that in these statistics that I'm presenting to you. It just, you don't know which exact incident it was. Okay, 2016, 2 to 5 rounds occurred 46% of the time. And the next number up was 1 round, 27% of the time. Again, look at the 1 rounds. I'm starting to think that the 1 round should be removed from the study. It just makes you wonder, are these intentional or are these accidental discharges? And you guys, I apologize if I mixed up the terms accidental and negligent. I keep needing to remind myself that a negligent discharge is a legal term after the fact. This is a term that is decided in court, whether it's negligent. The proper term is accident. Right now, as we speak, I know that there's some firearm instructors that are going to disagree. Not every accident not every shooting that's not intentional is an accident. It could be It's purely negligence. You're being negligent. Well, that's a legal term. At least the Gunsight Academy in Paulden, Arizona, the world's largest firearm training facility. That's how they classify the unintentional firing of the gun. Accident, not negligent. All right, so look at the numbers. That 2 to 5 round count keeps popping up, by the way. I'm going to present to you a case study. This is Dean Keller versus Jeffery Weigle. This is an incident in 2017 that occurred in Indiana. Johnson County Prosecutor's Office reviewed this incident. So Keller was an off-duty firefighter, and Jeffery Weigle was the neighbor. He didn't own the adjacent property. He's the older gentleman that you see walking back and forth on the other side of the fence. There has been some disputes in the past. Both have gotten into a physical altercation and both were arrested for battery. But the main thing that we need to focus on here is the round count. Okay, how many rounds were fired? Let's watch this video. I am not going to show any violence in this video. I don't want to get banned from YouTube. I don't want to be demonetized. So I will leave I'm debating whether or not to leave a link in the description. If I will, then I'll do that. If not, then you can just Google Dean Keller versus Jeffery Weigle, or just type in Johnson County Prosecutor's Office firefighter involved shooting, and you will see the complete encounter. Okay, that's caught on video. And by the way, the video camera angle is from Mr. Keller's side of the property, so it looks like he had some type of hidden camera because he knew that there's been disputes there in the past, and he wants to show the court that he's in the right, and he has a job to save as well. So let's watch the video. It goes back. You see that gun? See that gun? Okay. If you got to rewind the video, then please do so. But he actually goes back. When I mean he, I mean Mr. Weigle. You see him go forward. Just watch his hand. He has a gun in his hand, and he goes back, and then he orientates the gun towards Mr. Keller. So in the end, there was no charges filed against Mr. Keller. Prosecutor's office agreed this was a self-defense encounter, and I would agree also that this is self-defense. So let's see how many rounds are fired. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now, I counted 11. There was some return fire from Mr. Weigle, but just watching this video, I kept pausing it, stopping it. You guys, I counted 11 rounds. Okay, actually, I believe there was more than 11 rounds. In California, remember, we can't carry more than 10 rounds. This would include an actual magazine change. Now he's in Indiana. Okay, he probably has 15 rounds in the magazine, but in California, especially, you would have to do a magazine change, and have two. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a different part of the video. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. So, Mr. Weigle was shot, and what he ended up doing was he was able to return fire after being shot. Okay, he was hit, and I'll show you where he was hit. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is not an exact representation. This is an estimate. But he was shot in the chest 4 times. I don't know what type of ammunition was used. I don't know the caliber, but I will tell you that Weigle was hit 4 times in the chest. This is where you're supposed to hit somebody if you want them to stop, if they present a lethal threat to you. Right in the chest, maybe a headshot as well for a failure drill, because the shots in the head the shots in the chest aren't working. But you guys, you would think 4 hits, not shots, but 4 hits, and you're down. and him being 59 years old. Okay, a 59-year-old being hit with 4 rounds. He survives. He survives. He is so lucky to be alive. And I'll show you him getting off of the tractor and just walking off. Watch. And put the audio all the way up. He mentions, he gives some vulgar language to Mr. Keller, by the way. But watch. And you might have to turn up the volume a little bit.
Oh, God. Fucker pulled a gun on me. Oh, God. Oh.
Look at, he's getting up.
Motherfucker.
Imagine that. Okay, over 10 rounds fired, 4 hits in the chest, and he storms off upset and walks off. This is just more of a reason why you need more than one magazine.
Oh, God. Fucker pulled a gun on me. Oh, God.
Let's watch this again.
Motherfucker.
Very, very, very lucky. Okay. Summary. We talked about the Keller-Weigle case study. Okay, I heard more than 10 rounds. I heard more than 11 rounds from our firefighter, Mr. Keller here. That would include at least 2 magazines, at least in states where you are, in my opinion, constitutionally restricted on the number of rounds that could go inside of a magazine. We talked about NYPD and Portland and Miami. When you total these 3 agencies together, you get 4.33 round count. And obviously you're gonna round up to 5. And remember, some agencies didn't disclose what the round count is, but this is what we found. When you total all 5 agencies together, you get a mean score of a 34% hit rate. 34% hit rate. You might need another magazine because you run out of ammunition. And if you're private security, okay, you may not practice as much as law enforcement. You should, because you might not have the resources. When law enforcement, when they qualify, they get paid for it, they get compensated for it. The ammunition is usually paid for, depending on what agency they work for. Private security, it's a lot different. Now, this is my criticism of the study, that this included the larger agencies. When there's larger agencies, there is more backup. When there's more backup, you're probably going to have more overall rounds fired per incident. Just imagine the small agencies, though. Okay, what are the round counts? We don't know. Okay, that's what we can tell you. We don't know. Los Angeles County incorporated all of the agencies that were involved in shootings during a certain time period, except LAPD. They told us what the hit ratio was, 51%. They didn't tell us about the misses. They didn't tell us anything about the hit ratio. Partners, all these agencies, many times you have a partner with you. And when you have a partner, your round count is going to go, it should go down. Quick backup. Hey, these agencies, you call, you respond to some of these calls, and there's an officer down the street. Okay, being private security, you might not even have a phone. And if you have backup, you probably have to call them on a phone, or they might just randomly show up, but you don't have the luxury. And again, we don't know if any of these officers survived. Did they survive with 4.33 rounds being fired? If they fire more rounds, would they have survived? We don't know that. We don't know how many misses in all of these studies. Well, we know what the misses are for the agencies that give us the hit ratio, but the other ones, we don't know what the misses are. A number of suspects, okay? We can actually assume that most of these incidents were one suspects, because most of the time when there's a lethal force encounter, okay, it's A lot of times it's suicide by officer. Many times it's suicide by officer. You usually don't have two people that want to die by suicide by officer at the same time. You normally have one. But what if this is your armed robbery at your post? Okay, um, a lot of times there's going to be more than one. There could be two. So for that reason, we're going to need to have at least two magazines. More training. We talked about this. These agencies probably have more training than your average private security company. Talk about rounds. 3, 4, 5. Okay. So the 5 rounds represent the average rounds that were needed during the NYPD Portland Miami study. And I want you to also focus your attention on the NYPD studies, particularly on the right part of the pie. Look, 13% of the time, and this is in one of those years, between 11 and 20 rounds were fired. In California and other constantly restricted states, you're going to need a magazine change there. And then on 3% of the time here, 20 rounds or more were fired. But look at 13% time between 11 and 20. This could be 15 rounds, 17, 18, 19 rounds. So the cartridges popping up, this represents how many rounds you should carry in a magazine. If you want to leverage the playing field, by the way, out there. So we're at 5, we're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. If we want to feel confident, okay, assuming you have some good training, but if you want to feel confident walking out of this presentation, 20 rounds, it appears, are sufficient most of the time. Now, what my suggestion is that you have 20 rounds in one magazine inside the primary gun at any moment's notice. That's recommended. But we all know that unless you have a staccato P duo or some other double stack, maybe 1911 style handgun that's a 9mm, you're probably not going to find a 20 rounder. Maybe the 5.7 FN, you'll have a 20 rounder, but a lot of the duty type guns, you're not going to find no 20 round magazine unless there's a huge piece of the magazine that extends past the well of the grip of the gun. Okay, then it might become a little bit uncomfortable. You sit in the car and the magazine is stabbing at the seat. It's ripping the interior. Again, that's a lot of rounds in the magazine. But many duty guns, and especially 9mm, between 15 and 17, I mean usually 17 is more common. 17 rounds in one magazine, and then one in the chamber is sufficient almost every single. It would be sufficient in almost every single one of the counters that we studied here. Now, if you're a constitutionally restricted state, that's going to be 2 full magazines. Okay, that's 2 full magazines, and the third, and after a gunfire lethal force encounter, if you feel like you spent a lot of cartridges in this fight, you're going to want to get another magazine. You don't want to leave the fight empty-handed, because there could be somebody else lurking in the shadows. So carry our 1 magazine for sure, preferably 20 rounds. Most magazines do not have 20 rounds. 17 of 9mm is common. For 45, it just depends. You might have some that have 7, 8 rounds. If you have a 1911 style or you have a double stack, you might end up carrying more. 40 caliber, 13, I think 15 rounds for a Glock 22 is normal. Or Glock 17 or a lot of the SIGs, okay, the SIGs that are coming out are H&Ks. Again, they're 9mm. It's going to be close to 17. That's usually sufficient, but you also need that other mag. So these are my final thoughts. I discuss studies. I discuss larger agencies. But after all in all, considering my discussions with others, this is going to be the recommended loadout that I'm going to give to you. Now, mind you guys that I can't disclose incidents that I have been or have not been in. I'm currently in law enforcement. You're not going to find anybody that's in law enforcement that's going to disclose use of force incidents, critical incidents that they've been on. They're not going to do that while they're employed for an agency. When they retire, they might discuss that. Same thing with the military. When they leave the military, they might discuss it, but not currently. So what I end up doing is I end up gathering information from you guys who are watching this video, subscribers. There's a handful of you who have been in lethal force encounters and gunfights. So what I'm about to tell you, this is information that's from you guys, and we need to take those incidents into account as well. One of you guys been in a gunfight with a 1911 style pistol, 45 caliber. You ran out of ammunition on the 7th or 8th round, and you had to go behind cover and reload to get back in the fight. That's already 2 magazines. Okay, another one of you, 4 rounds. You were hit, I think, 2 or 3 times in the lower torso, and you fired about 4 rounds, and the perpetrator was able to get off running away from you. Okay, he ran away. There's others. Another gentleman, his first gunfight, he had a rifle with 5.56 caliber. It took 10 rounds for the bad guy to be standing, or actually to be laying in a pool of his own blood. That's 10 rounds, you guys. Californians, think about that. 10 rounds. That's almost the limit of the capacity of what you're allowed to carry. That's another magazine change. There's countless of other times of you guys who have been in these lethal force encounters. So number one, if you're in California, minimum of 3 magazines, and that's considering these statistics. If you have a 1911 style pistol where you're restricted to 7-8 rounds, you're going to have to carry multiple magazines, more than 4 or more, and that's including 1 in the well of the gun. Well, I would at least carry 1 in the well of the gun, and then 4 others. Those of you who have 9mm, smaller caliber, and you have a duty style weapon, your 15, 17 rounds that you have is sufficient most of the time, okay, for 1 person. Remember, you may need to reload. That's 2. If you have a 40 caliber, obviously the round count is going to go down that you're able to have in the magazine, and you might end up carrying maybe 14 rounds, maybe 15 rounds, okay? That is usually sufficient. Those 15 rounds is sufficient. I can't say this enough. You guys are in California, you have to practice the magazine exchange. Most of the time you can take care of the threat with the first magazine, but you have to be proficient at loading. So 1 magazine is for each bad guy, okay, depending on your magazine capacity. A second magazine should be used for, we'll say, a double feed or magazine issue. If there's a magazine issue with the first mag, you can always switch to another and have fresh ammo, and then get to the third. And that third magazine will keep you in the fight for sure with 1 person, and with 2, it should be sufficient. It just depends on the situation. You have 3 bad guys out there. It happens sometimes. Okay, 3 magazines per person would be sufficient. As for if to ask yourself if you have a double feed problem, and in these lethal force encounters, that you might not have a double feed even in training, but the worst of luck during one of these critical incidents you might have. You got to be prepared. So maybe the fourth magazine. Look at your statistics. What's going on around in your community? Are these gunfights, lethal encounters? Are they with one person, two people? Okay. So remember, one magazine per person. You may need a second. Okay, while reloading behind cover. The second could be used for a second threat. The threat's usually eliminated with the first person, and then the third magazine is for a potential malfunction. Okay, so minimum 3. If you want to carry 4 magazines, that's fine. Okay, 6, 7. Your mission, your post dictates on how many magazines you will be carrying. It can always vary. Your loadout can change. You're working an aggressive riot, you might need more magazines than 3. You might need more magazines than 4. What I don't want you to do is this. So if your magazine is able to hold 15 rounds, I don't want you to put a magazine extension to increase your capacity to 18 rounds or 19 rounds or 20 rounds, unless you field test at the range these magazines consistently. You're doing 200 rounds with that same magazine, loading, unloading, and until you feel confident that it's going to work in the gunfight, I wouldn't carry it. But all in all, if my life depended on it, I would not put a magazine extension, because the chance of a malfunction with your magazine are going to increase once you put that magazine extension on there. A magazine extension, or our original magazines from the manufacturer, they weren't made they were not designed for another manufacturer, an outside manufacturer, a third party, to create a product and attach it to theirs. They weren't designed to do that. Now, do they work? Of course they do. Many times that they do. But I wouldn't sacrifice dependability just to increase my round count to 20 rounds. You guys, seriously, my life depended on it. I'd rather have the 15 rounds that's going to work in the original manufactured magazine, 17 rounds, 13 rounds, 14 rounds, whatever it is. I'd rather have that than put a magazine extension and increase my round count. I could always reload. But look at the statistics. The statistics are telling us that the first 5 rounds, okay, it ended up stopping the situation most of the time. Okay, those of you that have magazine extensions on your gun and you think that they're not going to malfunction, well, have you tested it? How many times have you tested it? I want to know, because I work on a part-time basis at a range, and I've seen these magazine extensions malfunction the gun. And these are for guns that are going out in the field that could be used, that are used in law enforcement purposes. They're used in security purposes, and it just scares me what these magazine extensions do. So definitely, I'm not totally against them. Just make sure that you test them, you run them through a couple hundred rounds. Make sure that magazine extension works. That's all the time we have for today. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are. You guys all take care. Be safe. Comment, like, subscribe. I know that YouTube is going to probably ban this video, demonetize it. Please help me out by sharing it and liking it. Thank you.